Today, the Civilization 7 developers address some of the more controversial, uncertain, the new changes to Civilization 7. How are civilizations and leaders selected for the game? And more importantly, why? Why introduce that new system of changing civilizations through 3 in-game ages? So the first item, how do they choose the leaders and civilizations in Civ 7? Firaxis opened by saying that it used to be a pretty dang casual affair. Quote, in the old days, the selection process was often pretty loose. A designer might think, hey, this could be fun, and that would be all it would take to get them into the game, end quote. However, when it comes to selection in Civilization 7, they give us basically 3 key things, the criteria that must be met. Firstly, historical prominence. When players think about history, few civilizations and figures from the past instantly come to your mind, and I bet some come to your mind too. Leaders and empires who left a lasting mark. Secondly, player representation. Particularly in the last decade, they say that community and their ability to connect players from around the world has grown immensely, and representing that in a civilization game, representing its players, especially those that may have been traditionally underrepresented, makes up the second piece of the criteria. And finally, Civilization 7 is a game after all. The third piece is interesting gameplay. Leaders and civs that are fun to play. People have carved out particularly interesting paths through histories and civilizations who have huge potential for uniqueness in a civilization game. But Civilization 7 is different. As I mentioned in the introduction, it has 3 ages and the ability to mix and match leaders. On the leaders front, Firaxis sell this by basically framing it as something that will be very liberating in comparison to past gameplay in past Civilization games. Leaders essentially needed to be the most popular or the most well-known, which meant rulers, kings, queens, presidents, or maybe another political figure. But in Civilization 7, the great figures are expanded out to new categories: philosophy, human rights, science, and more. Example given Benjamin Franklin or Confucius. And on the age front, they essentially argue that it allows a focus across a broader range of civilizations. Instead of a civ needing to meet that really high bar of historical prominence across all history and compete across all history, now civilizations are competing within just one age. They use the example of Aksum or the Maurya India as an example. Cultures that weren't particularly prominent perhaps overall, but were very much so in a specific slice of history. Basically, they can focus in on different areas of history instead of having the entire history compete with itself. More specialization, more focus. Before I conclude this section, I'd like to interrupt with some rather breaking news. While I've been making this video, Firaxis have been live streaming at PAX Australia. Sadly, just across the ditch, but I can't make it. Nonetheless, there was some breaking news. First and foremost, what you're looking at right now. Vietnamese leader Trung has been announced, and this is likely a reasonable pairing with Khmer. At least that was what was noted in the trailer. During the PAX live stream, among many other things, mostly focused around art and the wide diversity of artwork available to units and all sorts of things in Civ 7, they also announced that there will be 10 civilizations in the game per age at launch. And this will relate a little bit to something that I'm talking about at the end of the video. Anyhow, I'm going to let us get back to it now. Finally, though, I would just like to ask you to subscribe. We are not actually on track to hit the big milestone 100,000 subscribers by the time Civilization 7 comes out in February of next year, but it is close. So if you wouldn't mind joining me, I pledge to continue to cover this game right up until launch and indeed afterwards. I want this to be one of the best places to come for Civilization 7 news and updates and all sorts. Anyway, now let's get back to how leaders and civs are selected, where they talk about personas, which make a return from Civilization 6, where they were used to acknowledge historical figures who had ties to different civilizations, i.e. one leader where you can play as multiple civs, or those who excelled in 2 unique and important areas of statecraft. Importantly for Civ 7, these personas return, with a stronger focus on that latter part, as the ability to mix and match leaders and civs inherently covers the idea of a leader being represented by multiple civilizations. How does this matter for Civ 7 gameplay? Every persona comes fully equipped with their own unique feature set, a unique ability, and agenda, as well as a distinct outfit and background of visual appeal. And we already have an example of this, Napoleon, who can be played as either Emperor or as the revolutionary persona. And these will have different abilities, agendas, and again, cosmetic styles. And we've already seen that play out. Now on to the big one, perhaps the most controversial part. Why mix and match civilizations and leaders? Why allow a consistent leader across 3 ages, but change the civilization each time? Well, apparently a major reason for adding mix and match was to support that ages system. In the past, we'd play consistently through, but in Civ 7, they also needed to try and address that challenge of a strong, cohesive sense of who you're playing as and who you're playing against. So they introduced mix and match to support the ages, but how exactly did they tackle it? Well, interestingly here, there's a little bit of an insight. They talk about how they thought about the idea of switching leaders per age. And they also toyed with designing stacks, where every Civ would be like what we have for India, where there's an Indian option in each age and kind of a logical pairing there. This part I find particularly interesting, because as they announce civilizations and as I cover them here on the channel, I can't help but sort of stack them in my mind. You know, I'm thinking Roman Empire might go into the Normans, might go into French Empire. I'm already sort of stacking it, so it's interesting that they bring that up here. However, these other ideas, they argue, fell short. Swapping leaders would be too confusing, too disruptive, again, to that central idea of an identity of who you are and who your opponents are. They also argue that players often refer to leaders rather than nations, Cleopatra, not Egypt. Similarly, they argue that the stack idea, as in a direct historical lineage idea, meant that they would be greatly limited to who they could consider adding to Civilization 7. Interestingly, they use the example of America. You won't be able to pick a Civ who spans past the entirety of history anymore, so no more America. I can't help but feel that America could probably slot into a stack here, right? I mean, just recently they revealed a nation in the continent of North America in the age before the modern age, the Shawnee. So there's already maybe a mental stacking going on, but I can also understand where they're coming from here. If you have forced stacks, it does kind of limit you a little bit because there must be logical precursors. It removes that flexibility or that idea of liberty from earlier. Okay, so Firaxis have thought about those options, decided against them. Let's return now then to mix and match. Why? Well, again, ages. Through the feature, they're able to make sure that they maintain a sense of identity by keeping the leader consistent. They've also created, they argue, historical pathways instead of that strictly stacked empire model. This allows for more replayability and allows them, again, going back to that idea, that second piece of the leadership criteria, a more diverse set of cultures. They also argue they're able to expand leaders into new categories, as we talked about before, shining lights on different figures throughout humanity in different ways that players can discover for the first time. And again, returning to the idea, the final idea this time of gameplay, they argue it helps with the strategic layer. Each leader has a playstyle. You'll be able to blend that playstyle with different traits of different civilizations. One part that they didn't mention here that comes to my mind is also the flexibility within a game. You might start with your leader playing on their more militaristic side, but as you play through, you realize that that militaristic strategy, for whatever reason, I'm not judging you, maybe didn't work out. Then you can pivot towards more of the diplomacy, right? This supports the idea of Civ swapping. Just a couple of times, you want to still keep a game consistent, but it does allow you to mix things up a bit, alongside other things we've talked about already like legacy pathways. That's just my thinking though. Let's return now to the developer diary, actually moving in to the penultimate section. How does this stuff affect gameplay? What's new in Civilization 7? They begin by talking about the broad structure that you and I will play with when we choose a Civ. Each Civ comes with a unique ability, unique infrastructure, a unique civic tree, as well as an associated wonder. You'll also receive 2 unique units. One of them will be a civilian, and the other one will be a military unit. and generally, but not always, there'll be some sort of starting location bias. Combine all of those things together, it tends to nudge the player and the Civ towards a certain playstyle, whether it be, again, militaristic or perhaps diplomatic, cultural, economic. Those features of a civilization will change, of course, when you change Civs. However, some things will remain the same. We're referring to these as they do ageless features. The example they talk about is Han China, which has a unique civic tree. The civic tree itself is ageless, or at least the traditions that are unlocked, available to be slotted into social policies for your empire in future ages, regardless of which civilization you choose. Again, on the Han example, it has the unique infrastructure of a Great Wall, whereas a Roman player will instead receive a unique quarter, which essentially supports their two unique buildings. Build them in the same district, there's your unique quarter. Regardless of whether it's the Great Wall or the Roman Forum, these are ageless as well. So their effects will last across all ages, and you can't build over top of them. So yes, your civilization will change, but a few things will stay the same. Another thing that will remain ageless, or consistent, the same through the game, is of course your leader, but specifically, a little bit later in the update, they talk about leader attributes. This is a very interesting, and I think quite a wonderful system. Attributes offer a way to customize your leader further during the course of a game. You earn points, and you can assign them within different categories. Cultural benefits, diplomatic, economic, expansionist, militaristic, and scientific. Those generic kind of 6 ones. You'll assign the points to skill trees, to unlock abilities, and of course, as your leader is essentially ageless, so too are these attributes. They persist across the ages. You can earn points, by the way, by building certain wonders, researching certain civics, completing narrative events, or rewards for completing broader milestones along your victory pathway. This is the other core ageless feature around your leader. Back to civilization gameplay, that is the actual Civs themselves. Civilian units will come in different shapes and sizes. If you watched the first 20 Civs video, would recommend it if you haven't seen it, but of course I would because it's mine and I'm shameless. We talked about how some civilians are essentially like little great people. Han China's unique civilian unit, every time you build it, offers a different reward, but you can only receive each reward once. The Mayans' unique Jaguar Slayer replaces their scout, and it can place down traps on the map on vegetated tiles to damage enemy units and end their movement for that turn. Very cool. Also unique to each civilization alongside those civilian units is an associated wonder. And as we talked about in my video, generally this is something like a 30% bonus towards producing it. And they may also unlock that wonder earlier on through their unique civic tree. However, it's important to note it's not ring-fenced just within their grasp. Anybody can ultimately build it, they'll just have a little bit of a head start. Every civilization will have a wonder. Rome, for example, Colosseum. One final note here on the actual gameplay itself for the leaders and the civilizations, and this time we're turning to the leaders. Each one, as you might already know, has a unique ability, agenda, and sometimes a starting bonus, and this will, of course, impact how you play. What is probably most important here that I've highlighted, if you didn't know already, in Civilization 7, the AI will always pair leaders and civs with their closest ideal choice. Think back to that criteria. That's, I think, a lot of the decision making here. Generally and typically, the ideal choice will be determined by historical ties between civilizations or geographical ties. Think back to the example I mentioned earlier of Rome going through to Normans. We're thinking up around, of course, the kind of northwestern area, and then the Normans becoming the French. And in the final brief section here, we take a quick look ahead. What's to come for Civilization 7, and what are Firaxis telling us next? Well, in a previous video, we already discussed that Civilization 7 will launch with the most leader selections it's ever had any Civ game in franchise history, and today they've updated us that, yep, you guessed it, it will also have the most civilizations at launch throughout the franchise's history. This probably shouldn't come as a surprise, given the ages system. The game has been divided into 3 parts. You're gonna need some more civilizations to fill that up, right? Likewise with leaders. It will of course be interesting to see how these games launch, the leader count and civ count at launch, compared to what a fully developed Civ game is like, after it's had years of extra free update and paid content. And there are no promises here made around that, and I probably wouldn't expect there to be. Good to see that there will, though, be the most Civs and the most leaders at launch. And finally, here to round out the video, the next developer diary is something of a topic that they say Civ fans have been dying to know more about: empire management. I know, management, it's getting people excited. Calm down, okay? You in the back, settle. No, but seriously, they'll be detailing how cities work, population, yield, what on earth a warehouse building is, the concept of overbuilding, and more. And if you'd like to hear that, of course, you can get it first and foremost by reading it yourself. I'll have this developer diary link down below, as well as covering the future ones. So again, stick around, be sure to subscribe. We've got plenty more Civilization 7 news and updates to discuss. I'll see you next time.